Hi, everyone. Today we're going to be covering chapter 16, which is all about managerial communication in the workplace. Communication within organizations. This is communication between individuals. It could be communication among several individuals or groups within the organization, and then communication outside the organization. So this could be like talking to stakeholders or the public. But communication is one of the most important pieces of business. It's one of the most highly sought skills in employees in businesses. And so you can imagine that an organization can't function if it doesn't have a great communication system. It's at the heart of every successful organization. And you all will hopefully become managers one day. And it's your ability to convey your ideas, to talk to your staff, to understand your staff, to understand others. That's really important because that will lead everything else. So hopefully by the end of the chapter, you'll be able to understand the whole communication process, how it works, the different types of communication, and how managers influence communication, and then also how effective communication can shape the reputation of the organization. So think about how companies talk to their customers, their stakeholders, their investors, the public, and how that shapes what people think about them. Think about maybe a business that is critiqued about something, and then they come out and they make a statement about it. How they make that statement, what they say, how they say it, all of that matters. And the perception that is given to the public based on what they say and how they say it ultimately shapes the future of that company because people might, if maybe they don't like the way that they addressed the public or their stakeholders, they might decide, I'm not going to continue giving this company my business. So it really does make a big difference. And then within the organization, of course, you want people to be able to work together, teams to be able to work together, and everyone to have this, well-oiled machine. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll go ahead and get started. Let's see if there's anything that I missed. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so chapter 16, managerial communication. So learning objectives for this chapter, by the end of the lecture and the chapter, you should be able to understand and describe the communication process, know the types of communications that occur within organizations, understand how power, status, purpose, and interpersonal skills affect communications in organizations, describe how corporate reputations are defined by how an organization communicates to all of its stakeholders. And then you should be able to understand why talking, listening, reading, and writing are vital to managing effectively and ultimately to helping this machine, this engine run efficiently. So let's start with the communication process. The communication itself is more than just talking. It's a process. First, we have encoding, which is when the sender puts their thoughts into a message, like an email or a presentation, or a simple conversation. And then comes decoding. So, like, what does that message say when the receiver interprets that message? And next, there's feedback, and this is the response that tells the sender if the message was understood correctly. Without feedback, you might never know if your message came through in the way, whether your message that you were intending to convey to the receiving party was actually understood correctly. So you might never know if your point actually came through. And then we have something called noise, and this is basically anything that creates like a busyness, distraction from your point. So anything that distorts or interferes your message. Noise can be literal, like a noisy office, or it could be like maybe using misunderstanding words or cultural differences. So it could be a different things. So imagine you send an email asking a coworker for a report, and then they misinterpret that email. Maybe they misinterpret your deadline or something. So that's noise affecting your communication. You're asking for confirmation or having a quick follow-up can actually reduce that noise because you make it clear what you were asking. And so, again, you encode by encoding is you actually, writing the email, texting, telling someone what it is that you are trying to communicate. And then the person that's receiving that message has to decode it. They have to interpret what is this person asking me to do. And then they provide feedback by saying, like, okay, yes, I will get that report back to you by Friday at 5 p.m. or whatever. And so that makes it clear that your message was received and that the content in the message was delivered correctly. And then again, the noise are things that could potentially get in the way of you communicating that. Maybe your wording is a little bit vague. Maybe if you're talking, maybe the way that you say it, or the mannerisms, or maybe your tone, kind of, creates a filter that doesn't allow the person to actually understand what it is that you're saying. And so this is a process that occurs every time we have communication, even though we might not realize it. This happens every day when we either send a text to our friend, email our professor asking for something. So I encourage you to actually think about this next time you're sending a message or writing an email, or texting someone. Think about, what am I saying in my message? Is the person receiving the message correctly? Are they giving me some kind of feedback? And what kind of noise is getting in the way of me communicating my message? And obviously, when you're asking for something, or when the communication is very direct, it's this communication process. When your asks or your message that you're sending is very clear, then this communication process, is easy to navigate. But there are times when this process, is challenging because of the message that's being delivered. Maybe you're trying to give somebody feedback. I'll give you the example of my house cleaner left my gas stove open the other day when she cleaned my house, and I need to tell her that hey, I want to let you know that you left my gas stove on the last time you were at my house, but I don't want to hurt her feelings. I don't want to, um, I want to be careful with how I say it because I really like her, and I don't want her to leave me, in terms of being my house cleaner. So I have to send a message to her that says, basically what I want to say is, hey, you left the gas stove on. Please don't let that happen again, because it could be dangerous. It could lead to something, you know, big if I had a candle or something that I turned on when I got home, or and so that's what I want to say. But how I say it, is going to determine whether she understands that from my message. So I have to think about how I'm going to say it, and then I have to think about how she's going to interpret it. So she has to decode that. So I have to say, hey, I just wanted to let you know that you left my stove up on at my house the other day. If that's all I say, then how is she going to interpret it? So I want to be clear with my message to make sure that she understands what I'm trying to say. And I'm hopeful that the feedback that she gives me will say, okay, I understand, and I won't let that happen again. And so the noise in this example is, maybe I'm trying to be polite. Maybe I'm trying to sugarcoat it. And that maybe will get in the way. Maybe there's a cultural difference between us. So that those things could be considered noise. And imagine if I were trying to say this message to her in person while she's vacuuming or something, right? That could be literal noise. But this process, again, this is what we do every single time we communicate something. So within organizations, there are different types of communication. There's oral communication, written communication, and nonverbal communication. Oral communication is obviously speaking face to face. It could be a phone call, a video, Zoom meeting. It could be a face-to-face meeting. And then we have written communication, and this could be an email, a report, a memo. And then we have nonverbal communication. And this one is really tricky. It could be body language, facial expressions, our posture, our eye contact, how we are looking at the person when we're talking to them. And so it's important to recognize that most messages are interpreted not just by the words, but by your tone, your gestures, the context, all of that. So if you're running an organization, if you're a manager, so let's say that your manager explains something to you and you respond by giving them a thumbs up. So that nonverbal sign confirms, okay, I get what you're asking me to do. I got this. Yep. Or it's like a yes. So there's different types of nonverbal communication. Sometimes it's maybe you turn around, or maybe you don't face the person when they're talking to you, or it could be like slamming a door, or maybe you're talking to someone and you slam your laptop down, or you're doing something when you're upset, that communicates that you're upset, or Maybe it could be like pulling up a chair for someone. I mean, there's so many different things that could be considered nonverbal communication, from nodding to a thumbs up to stop. Let me stop you right there without saying it. You could say, put your hand like this, and that means like stop, right? So there's different signs or signals that we use when we're communicating. So it could be, again, tone, your gestures, the context, your body language, all of that. So understanding the different types of communication is helpful, but communication is also influenced by social and organizational factors. So let's jump into that. So communication doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's social influences like culture, hierarchy, or personal relationships that might affect how messages are interpreted. There's also perception that plays a role. So people may see the same message differently based on maybe their experiences or what, their expectations are. And then there's interaction involvement, which means that some people engage more actively in discussions than others. And lastly, there's organizational design. So how your company is structured really does impact how communication flows. And that's why there's people that get paid lots of money to design something called an org chart for big companies, especially as they grow, because it's so important for the communication lines to be open within certain departments, or, if something is failing, if something is happening on the ground, that's something that a high level manager would need to know. And so how do you facilitate that communication to make sure that it happens? So that organizational design is really, really important. And when you go into, like, even think about if you work in an office right now, think about how your organization is designed. How do you talk to your boss? Do you have access to your boss? When I worked in the legislature, we worked for a senator, and we did not have access to the senator. Like, if we wanted to talk to him about something, we had to go through the chief of staff in order to talk to the senator or to convey that message to him. So it's interesting. Every organization is different. Not all senators were like that. Some of them had an open door policy for all of their staff. In my particular office, they did not allow that because the senator was busy or whatever. So we were to go to the chief of staff or the legislative director in order to communicate something to our boss. So it's interesting how it might vary depending on the industry that you're in, but I encourage you to think about all the different things that impact the communication within your workplace, or even within maybe your classroom or your study group, whatever that might be. But information has to be able to flow upward and downward, right? If the organization decides that they're going to implement a new policy or have a new mission or vision, whatever that might be, it has to have the lines of communication open. The communication has to be able to travel from the top to the bottom, all the way down to the people on the ground that are actually doing the work of the organization. And likewise, if something happens on the ground that needs to be fixed or changed, a concern that someone might have that can potentially save the company from a lawsuit or improve something that the organization is doing, or, it can be maybe a product recall or a safety issue, that needs to be able to be communicated. So the less barriers you have, and the better structure you have in terms of having that organizational design. Obviously, it's impossible to have thousands of employees to be able to talk to maybe a CEO, but if you have systems in place where maybe you have all managers or all the reporting happens to a specific level, and then that level reports to the top, or whatever that might be, it has to be structured in a way that makes sense based on the size of the organization, the industry, the work that the organization does, and just it all has to fit like a puzzle. And that's a very careful balance, a very careful, there's a science to it. And I think that's why, people get paid lots of money to create these org charts. So now let's transition to what shapes communication. Let's look at the specific roles that the managers in organizations play to facilitate that organizational communication. There are different roles that managers play to facilitate this organizational communication. The first one is interpersonal roles. There's informational roles and decisional roles. Interpersonal roles involve interacting directly with employees, like coaching or motivating. This is a really important piece to the newer generations. It's something that I think really shapes how long people want to stay in their roles or how much they love or hate their job. Then there's informational roles. This includes like updates, reports, interpreting data for decision making. And then there's decisional roles, which is more like negotiating, resolving conflicts, or allocating resources. So you have to make these decisions that impact, the organization, and maybe groups within the organization. Maybe you're negotiating on something. So effective communication is vital in all of these different roles. You have to be good at all of these. And having managers in place that really excel in this really shapes that good communication within the organization. So, as an example, a manager could be negotiating project deadlines, and they have to communicate that clearly to avoid misunderstandings that could impact the team. The person that ultimately ends up in these roles has to be good at, taking off a hat, putting another one on, and having these roles be quickly, interchangeable, overlapping, depending on the situation and the people you're dealing with. But getting experience in these different roles is really something that comes with time, exposure, being in these roles, sometimes making mistakes and learning from them, but ultimately, you have to be good at all of them when you're a manager. And if you hire someone that might only be good at several of these roles, but not all three, that could create challenges, especially for keeping staff within the organization, maybe not communicating effectively, or not being able to negotiate effectively, not being able to make decisions on allocating resources. So hiring someone in these roles that is really good at all three is the key. An organization's corporate reputation is very much shaped by communication. So your organization's identity, who they are, is what it stands for, how it kind of represents itself to the public. And then reputation is kind of like what others actually believe about the organization. So we could have an identity that we think represents something, but ultimately the reputation and what others actually believe is what shapes the actual perspective of the public. And we need the public in order to survive. We need our customers, we need our stakeholders to support us in order for our organizations to make a profit. So that reputation is really important. And managers who are in these roles influence that. And it's done through like public statements that they give when something happens. Like if there's a safety recall, how do they respond to that? Could be a press release, and even the day-to-day interactions with employees. And confidence in communicating clearly, both in speaking and writing, is really important because companies with strong reputations, they manage communication really well across all their channels. And that builds trust with the public, with customers, with employees, stakeholders, investors. So it really is an important piece of an organization's success. So think of like a tech company that's recalling a product or something. How are they going to communicate that recall with the public? They want to be quick, they want to be clear, and they want to be honest. Those are, I think, some of the important pieces. I see that especially with like baby products. Think about how a parent might feel if they know that they purchased something that could harm their child. If an organization knows about this potential risk or harm, how quickly they communicate that and how they go about making sure that parents are informed really says a lot about who they are. And think about like when Chipotle has their salmonella outbreaks or something, how do they handle that? And there's a lot of companies that have had situations like that where they'll have a salmonella outbreak and they are not able to survive or overcome that. Chipotle has done a really good job of navigating that space, and I've seen it go through different phases, but ultimately it's honest, it's quick, it's clear, and it has decisive action that it takes, and they're able to communicate that with the public. So I challenge you to think about companies that you frequent or that you're a regular of, whether it's a restaurant or a store. Like I see a lot of recalls from like Amazon or Target. Sometimes I'll get an email that says something was recalled. Typically, it's like a baby thing. I find that baby items are recalled a lot. But think about how the organization communicated that to you. Did they send you an email? Were they proactive? Were they honest? And sometimes, like I've seen lately at grocery stores, I think it was like carrots that were recalled at one point, and it was like a very specific brand and type of carrot that I purchased. And they sent me an email saying that there was a recall on these carrots because they were contaminated. And the way that they communicated that was by sending an email and giving me the steps that I needed in order to either, you know, throw out the carrots or figure out like how I was going to handle that. And to me, I think the biggest thing is the communication. They told me there is a recall so that I can take the steps that I need to protect my family. If I'm giving my baby carrots, well, that's concerning and I need to know that. And so that communication saves my, like if my child gets sick and it's from these carrots and I'm never told that there's an issue, well, I'm angry because I was never told. But if I'm told, I can watch out for symptoms, I can be proactive about taking care of my baby if she were to get sick, or even myself, right? So that you have to build that confidence, you have to be clear, you have to be honest, and have that trust. And the reputation, think about a reputation with a friend. Once someone lies about something or dishonest, it's really hard to rebuild that trust. And start building a reputation if they do it multiple times. So the reputation is much more important than the product issue itself. Like I gave you those examples of the carrots and the baby products, or a tech company that's recalling a product. It's all about how you communicate. I think people realize that mistakes happen, but if you're not honest and clear and quick in your reaction, I think people start, being hesitant to trust you as a company. And you have to be able to have a customer's or the public's or your investors' trust, because that ultimately leads to them wanting to continue doing business with you. So let's now look at some of the skills that people in these roles need to communicate effectively. So there's four major channels. The first is talking, and this is, again, one-on-one, in groups, in public. And sometimes it's a small group, sometimes it's a big audience. So being able to talk clearly, being able to communicate um, effectively, clearly, being articulate, all of those things. And then there's listening. People don't often see this as a way of communicating, but listening is equally as important. You have to be able to listen to people. And I find that a lot of us, including myself, sometimes I don't listen. As someone is talking, I'm already thinking about what I'm going to say next, or how I'm going to, respond to what they're saying. And I challenge you to listen to people when they're talking to you. Like, turn your brain off and focus on them without worrying about, how am I going to respond to this? How am I going to answer this question? What do I think about what they're saying? Sometimes we focus on their face. Sometimes we focus on, like, wow, that person's really pretty, or that person's very handsome, or wow, this person has really big teeth, or whatever, and we're so focused on all these other things that we don't listen. So I really encourage you to listen when someone is talking to you, and actually listen. I think when we pay attention, we realize all the 90 things we're thinking about. So try it. Next time someone talks to you, follow your mind and how your thought process goes, and let yourself go and just track it and see what you think about, and ask yourself, was I actually listening to what this person said, or was I already thinking about the next thing? Was I looking at their nose? Was I looking at their hair? Was I what were you focused on? And do a mental, like, checkpoint with yourself to see, it's important to understand, especially as a manager in these roles within organizations. You have to understand your employees. You have to listen to their feedback. You have to listen to their concerns. And that's a huge part of that communication process and facilitating it. And you have to practice doing it. It's a skill, just like anything else that can be built. So just want to challenge, and I say that one because a lot of us don't think of listening as part of the communication process. So then there's reading. This allows managers to absorb reports, memos, emails, all of that. So think about the encoding process. We're reading and interpreting information. And we don't think about that as maybe a major channel of communication, but it is because it's you're encoding messages from different things in order to do your job. And then there's writing. So crafting clear messages, whether it's an email report or some document, maybe it's a PowerPoint that you're presenting, whatever that may be. You have to be able to be clear in your writing, and that all of these really take you have to practice. Practice makes perfect. It takes experience, obviously, being out there and actually working on this process, and tackling maybe the ones that you find maybe are challenging for you or that you could work on. But together, these all ensure that messages are accurate, persuasive, that they're well received, that you're actually communicating what you need to say to your audience or to the receiver. So to give an example, a manager is leading a team meeting, and they have to listen to the team member concerns. They have to respond clearly. They have to follow up with written summaries to avoid misunderstandings. This is actually one of the best processes that I've been a part of in my career. And what will happen is you have a meeting, and this is something we just started doing last semester. So we'll have meetings to talk about schedules and different um, how we're scheduling classes, what times, and there's always notes about what time the class is offered, who's teaching it, is it going to be offered in the spring or the fall, does it align with certain degrees. And what happens is we have these really long meetings, we say really important things, and then we don't talk with the schedule is sent out. And then the following year we meet again and we're talking about the same semester schedule, but we have to remake all those notes all over again. And so what we started doing now is when we have these meetings, we take the notes. So they're listening to our concerns about the particular class schedule. And so what we do is we take the notes proactively for our leaders, our managers, and we make these detailed notes, and they're very clear about what we talked about, what our concerns were, and how they responded to those concerns so that it's in writing. And then we follow up with, as soon as the meeting ends, we send that memo to everyone at the meeting. And then we say, can everyone review this and make sure that I've captured everything that we've discussed today? And everyone reviews it, responds, and then we have that document. And now when we meet again the following year to talk about the same schedule, we actually have notes from our meeting that detail what we said, how our managers responded to those concerns, what we decided to do with that particular class. And now when the next schedule comes around, there are no questions because we have it all in writing. And this is one of the best strategies that, it saves time, it's clear, it makes the process more seamless because we already know what we're looking at. We know the history. It's almost like a way of capturing what was said, and allowing us to kind of hold our managers accountable too, and them to hold us accountable because we had this conversation. Here's what happened. And so when you summarize it, it creates a situation where you can always reference something that was said, something that happened, and everyone is on the same page about it. And so because we all said, yes, this is exactly what we discussed today, then the next time we meet, there's no question. That's what we discussed, and we're all on board, and we're able to move forward and make our schedule even better. And so that summarizing when you have a meeting is a really good just practice in general. I really encourage you all to, when you talk to your manager about something, always document it and say, it was great meeting. Thank you for meeting with me today. It was great to discuss, potential job promotions with you. Or I've had friends do that in particular so that they could document it. And it kind of you cover yourself because you're communicating with the manager and saying, that you discussed this, or it was great discussing this project. I look forward to working on this piece of the project. Just something that summarizes what you talked about so that if you misunderstood something, they make it clear right away. Like, yes, of course it was great meeting about the project. I will work on this and get it to you at the deadline that you requested, Friday by 5 p.m. No misunderstandings, it's clear. And I encourage you to do that in practice, and just to always kind of be on top of it. And you can always reference an email, if something goes wrong, and if they try to say, oh, well, it was supposed to be turned in on Thursday, well, you could say, well, I thought it was due on Friday. I sent you the email and you responded, thanks, and you always have that to, to cover yourself in case something were to happen. All right, so let's move on now to some practical tips that you can implement within your own career to improve your managerial communication skills. So the first one is to be clear and concise. Shorter is better and clear is better. So you want to say what you want to say and always try to make it short because people, if you put too much in the messages, people tend to not read them. Always seek and provide feedback. Ask for feedback and provide feedback. And then adapt your communication style to your audience. So think about who you're talking to and make sure that you're saying what you're wanting to say, whether it's an email or verbal oral communication. Make sure that you're saying it in a way that your audience will understand. Be mindful of your nonverbal signals. So it could be your body language, your tone, especially when you're a manager. I think managers have power. You are leading a group of people, and by default, you're in charge of their career, right? If something happens and you're unhappy with them, you have the power to end their career, end their job in your firm or in your organization. And so, as managers, you have to be able to take that into consideration when you're, especially like if you're going to be calling someone out because they're not doing something correctly, or um, maybe they messed up, maybe they're not meeting their sales targets, whatever that conversation is, you want to be, the word is diplomatic. You want to be able to say things in a way that encourage them, not shame them. Sometimes it's our tone, sometimes it's how we look. I had a supervisor that uh, would call us into his office when he wanted to talk about something that he wasn't happy with. And his computer was, so he had a desk and chairs. And so we would come in and sit in the chair. And then he had another desk behind him with his computer. So he would come in and he would literally ask you to sit down. And then he would turn his back to you and get on his laptop. And then you would just sit there like, am I going to get in trouble? Am I going to get fired? Like, what's going to happen here? And he would literally sit there with his back towards you for maybe like 5 minutes. And it was a really awful dynamic because I always, and not just myself, but my coworkers, we always felt like it was like a power thing. Like he was trying to, um, I don't know, make you like afraid or something. It was like a power trip kind of thing. And it always bothered us that he did that. It was very disrespectful. And when he called us out for something, it was more like, you know, what the way that he would say it is, what you like, his tone was very like father figure, like you need to do this, or I don't know how to describe it to you, but it was like you're getting in trouble by a parent vibe. And it was awful. We all hated it. So those nonverbal signals communicated to us that he didn't respect us, that he was doing some kind of power thing. He was trying to make us feel afraid, and it was working because we were always like, oh my God, we have to go into his office, and we dreaded that so much. So that those nonverbal signals, how you say it, what tone you say it in, what words you decide to emphasize. So before you have those difficult conversations, make sure that you're practicing and ensuring that it's going to be a constructive feedback kind of meeting, that what you're saying is going to be taken well, and that it's going to motivate that person to be better or to change or to, be more motivated about meeting their sales targets, etc. And same thing when you're trying to motivate people, when you have a big project and you want to get everyone on board, people work more and are more committed and are more efficient when they're happy and when they feel like they're part of a team. And those nonverbal signals really, really do make a big difference in that employee satisfaction and the overall success of the organization because the employees, run the engine. And then the listening piece, practice that active listening. Truly look at the person when they're talking to you and actually listen and understand what they're trying to communicate to you. So, if an employee is confused about something and you notice that in their body language, ask for questions. Maybe like, how, is there anything I can explain better? Um, you know, that type of approach avoids mistakes, prevents misunderstandings, and it helps you build that relationship with your staff so that they do feel like they have open communication with you and they do feel like they can come to you when things are not going well. So let's now just kind of go over some of the key takeaways in this chapter. And this is how communication and management happen. So communication is really the backbone of management. So we have got to understand this communication process, how it works. We have to understand the different types of communication, the factors that influence how messages are interpreted, and it could be power, status, purpose, or interpersonal skills. And then the critical roles that managers play in shaping communication both inside and outside the organization. And remember, it's about talking, listening, reading, and writing, and getting really good at those things, because those will help facilitate that organizational communication and make sure that it's successful. So whether it's any of these, speaking, listening, reading, or writing, every single interaction is an opportunity to improve understanding and build positive organizational culture. So, in closing, communication is really the manager's tool for success. And if you develop this skill, it's an art, and it's something that can really be developed. So, if you develop this skill really well, you can go into organizations and make significant changes and improvements to how everything works together. I, myself, I always look for ways of being a better lecturer, not saying certain words over and over when I'm talking. It's hard. I struggle with that myself. I'm sure you all have noticed in these recordings, I tend to say certain words over and over without even realizing that I'm saying them. And there's different things out there that you can do. One of the ones I've always wanted to do myself, but I've never had the time, is Toastmasters. And it's an organization where you can get together with Toastmaster members in the area and you practice speaking in public or speaking in front of the group. And that is a really great way of practicing, not being afraid to speak in front of others, not being intimidated to speak in front of others, and also to practice being confident in what you're saying without thinking about listening to your voice. I think that's the hardest part for a lot of people, that when you're doing a little like motivation speech to your team, or when you're interacting, even if you're talking in a setting where you're maybe talking to a manager, we tend to be intimidated by the situation, and we tend to focus on our voices. A lot of us, the way that we hear our voices is actually not the way that it sounds to other people. And like when I post my lectures, I listen to them sometimes. Just I'll push play to make sure that that it has a sound, because sometimes it's happened where I recorded a whole lecture and it didn't even have a sound because there was something going on with my microphone on my computer. So I always listen to it for a little bit before posting it. And when I hear my voice on the computer, it sounds very different from how I hear my voice. And sometimes there's actually science behind how that experience of listening to our voices impacts, like, even it's very distracting. It kind of creates a noise for ourselves. So the more you practice and the more comfortable you get being confident in yourself and being able to be, focus more on delivering the message than your own voice or the dynamics, that's how you'll communicate the best message. The other thing I recommend is reading, doing a lot of reading. Read the news, read articles, read books. There's a ton of books out there on communication itself and managerial communication and how to just be a better communicator. I think being diplomatic is also a skill that managers should have. You have to navigate sometimes the office politics, and this all matters to organizations, because when you have a bad manager in an organization, it shows. And a lot of times, either people will leave, or the work isn't being done correctly, or there's breakdowns in the process. And this person is kind of the one, whoever is the manager, has to be the one that creates that flow that ensures efficiency within the whole organization. And so, regardless of whether you end up being a manager or not, I do think that the communication piece is a really important skill that you should focus on building. Take business communications, read the communications books, join Toastmasters. It's always good to be able to communicate your message and to practice doing so to different groups so that you know how you're coming across. And it could be writing emails, it could be talking to people, speaking in groups, whatever that might be. Practice doing that. And lastly, I will say that because our tech driven world now, everything is on email, everything is Zoom, everything is online. One of the most important pieces that I think managers should focus on is emailing, email etiquette. If you haven't ever focused on that, I really, really, really stress to you. I get emails from students all the time. I came my era, I entered the workforce during a time when emails were much more formal. As time has gone on, it's become much more, um, casual. I mean, there's emojis in Outlook now, and that was something that was never there before. But how we draft our emails, especially as managers, really determines how people view us and how people respond. The more structured and formal you can make your emails, the more official and managerial you come across. And even if you're emailing me, I get emails from students sometimes that have no subject line, and they have a lot of no capitalization of sentences, no sentences, or sometimes it's like acronyms. Very, very informal. It kind of seems more like a text. And so I want to make sure that you differentiate between a text and maybe like a messaging system in the office and an email. And there's different ways of looking at each of those. An email should always be structured kind of like a letter. Texts obviously are different. They can be more casual because it's a text message, but typically we don't communicate within organizations through text message. It's usually an email or an inter-office like communication system like Slack or something like that, or a messaging system like Microsoft Teams. And when you're writing in those particular platforms, I don't think it should be as casual as a text message, but it should be a little bit less formal than an email. But practice uh, email etiquette and make sure that you have that, and that anytime you're emailing anyone, you always want to make sure that you follow the appropriate email etiquette, because it will, number one, it will train your staff on how to talk to you and how to communicate with you. But it also makes it really clear, like, dear so and so, here are the tasks for today. And then you have bullets, 1, 2, 3, 4. Please make sure that you get these to me by 5 p.m. Thank you. And it's like it really creates a better communication process, and um, it makes it clear what you're asking, and it makes it easier for the person to receive the message, encode the message, and know exactly what you're asking of them. And so it streamlines and avoids misinterpretations, misunderstandings. And there isn't a lot of focus on that particular aspect of communication. And I really feel that in my experience in my career, I've really seen how important and how much it matters. And so I want to give you that side note as you dive into this chapter, and also as you take some of these different tools into your own career. So that is it for this chapter. Thank you.